What the hell is that? Hello, everybody. John Aravosis here with the Aravosis Report. Welcome all. We are here to talk about Ukraine. Been a long weekend. Not a long weekend, but a long weekend. Lots of news, which I will update you all on. Bonsoir, Geeky Audrey. Why don't you do our usual where you guys maybe introduce yourselves, just say where you're from real quick. Just, hailing from Canada, wherever. And I will jump in right after that. But usually we take maybe a minute max for folks just to kind of say, hey, where you're from, gives people enough of a chance to arrive on TikTok. I am John Aravosis, as I said, and this is a show I've been doing almost every day now, at least Monday to Friday, since the war started in Ukraine. I go through the news of the last 24 hours, try to tell you what I think is important, why it matters, and then we get into the question and answer period at the end, where I take your questions and hopefully explain a little better, at least my expert take on what I think is happening. I'm going to actually jump right in as always. So I will talk maybe 20, 25 minutes. Then we'll do the question and answer. While I'm talking, you guys can submit questions if you want. On TikTok, submit questions via the Q&A function. Thank you for the gifts already. On TikTok, submit them via the Q&A function in my profile. On YouTube and everywhere else, you can just use the comment box. The best way you guys can support me and support my work are gifts and follow. So first of all, I'd say follow me on TikTok, follow me on everything else. And if you can afford to give gifts, that really helps as well, because I am doing this full time. And if you like independent media, if you like the show that I'm producing, please help me out if you can. Now, a couple different ways you guys can do gifts, and then I'm going to start in with the Ukraine news in about 30 seconds, I promise. First of all, YouTube, super chats. Great way, super chats, and what's the other cute little thing? The super whatever it is. But that's one way you guys can help me out on YouTube. YouTube gifts are great. I love the hats and all that kind of stuff. I will try to do a shout out every time I see you guys doing those. And TikTok subscriptions as well. Now, let me tell you how I will thank you guys. On YouTube, if you guys are able to do the super chat questions, I will always make a point of doing the super chat questions first. I will jump right in and do those. On TikTok, I will get to the subscriber questions first. I've got a little button at the bottom of my screen, TikTok has, where I can click the button and I will see all the subscriber comments first. So I will get to those first. And then finally, there you go. And then the gifts on TikTok, I will always try to do a shout out. All right, guys, let me dive right in. So a lot of news again in the last 24 hours, actually less 72 hours. This has been since Friday in Ukraine. Russia has been spreading a lot of disinformation about Ukraine this past weekend, trying to scare people, trying to gin up people into worrying about, what sort of horrible things Ukraine is planning to do. Among the things Russia has claimed in the last couple of days that Ukraine supposedly is doing, not true. One, blowing up the Kakhovka Dam, that Ukraine is preparing to blow up a dam in southern Ukraine that could, kill scores of people. Two, blowing up the Dnipro Dam, a second dam that they think the Ukrainians are trying to blow up. Three, a dirty bomb in Kherson. I will talk a little bit later about Kherson province in southern Ukraine. The Russians are trying to claim that the Ukrainians are planning to blow up a dirty bomb. A dirty bomb is basically a conventional bomb, a regular bomb that has nuclear material put with it. Now, what happens is a nuclear bomb, very complicated thing, right? I mean, apparently not so complicated, but you've got to do it just right to make the nuclear material explode and then exponentially increase into being a really scary nuclear bomb, right? Well, a conventional bomb, a dirty bomb as it's called, is basically taking just, any old bomb, and you pretty much tie some nuclear material to it. Plutonium, uranium, whatever. The point isn't to create a nuclear reaction. The point is when the bomb goes off, in addition to the bomb blowing up, whatever bombs blow up and sending it everywhere, it'll blow up the nuclear material, it'll pulverize it and send it everywhere. Now, what does that do? A, it scares the hell out of people because they think, oh my God, plutonium, uranium erupted, right? It's a scary concept. In other words, it works as a terror weapon, a bomb like this, a dirty bomb, but also it causes a lot of problems because you basically got a nuclear material that's been thrown everywhere. It pollutes everything. It spreads radiation. So it actually has a real world impact, these dirty bombs, in addition to being a terror weapon simply because nuclear material is flying. Well, the Russians are trying to claim that the Ukrainians are preparing to launch a dirty bomb in Ukraine. The final thing that Russians alleged in the last couple of days, and this also I would put in the dirty bomb category, is that the Ukrainians are preparing to blow up all 6 reactors at Zaporizhia, which is the nuclear plant that the Russians are occupying, and the Russians have been trying to blow up for months now. Now the Russians are turning around and saying, oh, it's the Ukrainians who are planning to blow it up. Let me get to sort of the main one. So the main one the Russians have been claiming in the last couple of days is that the Ukrainians are planning to blow up a dirty bomb in Ukraine, and the Russians are very worried about it. And the Russians are so worried about it, they said that they called up the defense ministers of the UK, Britain, right, the United States, France, and Turkey. And they got the Russian defense minister Shoigu on the phone with his counterparts in NATO and told each of them of how upset he was that Ukraine is preparing to launch this dirty bomb, which will spread nuclear material across Ukraine, and how, Russia's going to have to intervene. Well, fortunately, our Secretary of Defense, the French, the Brits, everybody jumped in and kind of said, you're out of your mind. It's not happening. Stop it. Now, what we don't know, oh, thank you for the swan there, McFedge. What we don't know is exactly what was discussed in this call with the Russian defense minister, because, for diplomatic reasons, you don't go public with everything. We do know that this accusation was brought up about Ukraine, preparing to do a dirty bomb. And we do know that the various defense ministers told him that that's a crock of bull, that that's going to happen. The Brits, the French, and the Americans also issued a joint statement, which apparently we don't often do from our governments, a joint statement from all 3 of us, publicly saying that the Russian allegation that Ukraine's going to launch a dirty bomb, a bomb that includes nuclear material, is absolute bull. It's not true. And we publicly accuse the Russians of spreading this lie in order to justify escalating on their end. Now, the issue kind of becomes with this is, what are the Russians really up to, right? Clearly, the Russians do not think Ukraine's preparing to launch a dirty bomb, right? Second of all, the Russians even said, and this is where, the Russians, it's funny. They're good at propaganda, but they're kind of bad at propaganda too. The Soviets were very good at propaganda, but the Russians always seem to go one step too far. And first they alleged that, Ukraine's planning to launch this bomb with nuclear material. Then they threw in the fact that, and the Brits, the British people, the British government are the ones giving the Ukrainians the nuclear material to blow up this bomb. Well, come on, right? I mean, I think it's absolute bull that Ukraine would be planning to blow up a bomb with nuclear material. But the idea that the British government is giving the nuclear material to Ukraine is just like, it's ludicrous. Now, again, what you have to kind of consider with some of these accusations is, to some degree, the audience isn't reasonable people, right? They're trying to convince maybe extremists in America, whether it's the far left or the far right, to give them, an argument to use. They're trying to convince people in developing countries who may not trust the British. I don't know, right? So that they're working that end. The other end that I think is even more scary about what the Russians are doing in terms of putting out these lies about Ukraine supposedly getting ready to launch a dirty bomb, right? Which, as I told you, is a bomb, a conventional bomb that has nuclear material attached to it. The concern is that the Russians are spreading this information as a false flag because they themselves might be preparing to launch such a bomb. False flag, I've explained to you guys before, but basically a false flag is when you do something intending to blame someone else. So in other words, the Russians would say, oh my God, we're so afraid that Ukraine is going to blow up a bomb with nuclear material in it. Then the Russians secretly go and blow up such a bomb, but they don't let anybody know that's them. And then they publicly say, oh my God, look what the Ukrainians just did. We told you they were going to blow up this bomb, and look, someone blew up a bomb, right? It's called a false flag. It's a real attack, but it's a fake attack in the sense that you secretly did it in order to blame someone else. So the concern here is whether the Kremlin is, the Russians are saying this because they themselves are planning to use nuclear material in a bomb, which would be very scary. Again, it's not going to cause a nuclear explosion, but it is going to spread nuclear material around, which will spread a lot of radiation and scare a lot of people. Just to remind folks, I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. We are here to talk about Ukraine. I'm summarizing the news of the last 72 hours, since it's been a long weekend, of what's going on in Ukraine, and then I will take your questions. And if you want to help me out, please do feel free to follow me on TikTok and elsewhere. And please keep the gifts coming, the super chats and the gifts on TikTok. I appreciate those. They help out. The Shoigu, this is interesting too. Before I move on from this topic, the Russian Defense Minister Shoigu, thank you for the lights there on TikTok, Alley. The Russian Defense Minister Shoigu held not one, but two calls with the American defense minister defense secretary in the last few days. Now, the first one was to spread this lie about Ukraine preparing to blow up nuclear material or whatever. The second one, we weren't sure what the heck was going on, but people were getting worried because they were like, why is the Russian defense minister calling the American, Secretary of Defense twice in like 3 or 4 days? That's a little creepy, right? Well, the New York Times reported on this. I'll just read you the paragraph from the New York Times. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke with Mr. Shoigu on Sunday for the second time. This is last night. In 3 days, U.S. officials said, in a conversation meant to delineate the red lines that could potentially provoke Russia to launch a nuclear attack on Ukraine. That was meant to clarify for the Biden administration why Mr. Putin has been increasingly raising the prospect of a nuclear strike in Ukraine. In other words, he called the Secretary of Defense, the Russians did, to let him know what would be their red line in Ukraine where they would go nuclear. Like, what would America do or Ukraine do that would make the Russians use nukes? Now, I am hoping our government turned around and said, there's literally nothing the Ukrainians can do other than themselves launching a nuclear bomb that should start you to launch a nuclear bomb in return. My guess is our government told them that. Now, this again is one more chance at the Russians being just trying to scare you, frankly, trying to scare me, trying to scare all of you. Thank you for that fishing on TikTok. They are trying to convince people that nuclear war is a possibility. Oh my God. And actually, I'm going to tell you in a couple stories coming up how sort of the far left fringe of Congress is now freaking out about this very aspect of nuclear war. Thank you, Jim, for that. So Putin's messaging is working, but he's trying to call the Secretary of Defense because, okay, they've got a couple different targets here. They're trying to freak out Biden, Scholz, and Macron especially, okay? The President of the United States, the Chancellor of Germany, and the President of France. They know that, Biden especially, thank you, Rita, Biden especially has talked about nuclear war and how he's worried about nuclear war and this kind of stuff. They're trying to freak him out. The Russian defense minister called the American Secretary of Defense and said, we will go to nuclear if you do this, this, and this, in order to convince the Americans that the Russians really would go nuclear. I don't think there's any chance. Thank you, going for that. I don't think there's any chance of the Russians going nuclear. Now, a dirty bomb, that's a whole other question, right? We talked about that at the beginning of the show, whether the Russians would try to use a conventional bomb that had nuclear material attached to it just to cause a lot of nuclear, radiation damage. Maybe, right? I mean, would they try to blow up the nuclear plant, the Zaporizhzhia plant, in order to spread radiation? Maybe. Now, blowing up a plant is not easy. You would pretty much have to provoke a meltdown. Would I put it past the Russians? No, right? But the idea of the Russians nuking Ukraine, I without going through all of it again, because I've talked about it in previous shows. But if anybody's worried about, nuclear war and all of that, I don't blame you, right? I don't want nuclear war either. You've got to ask yourself, why would the Russians do it? Why would they launch nukes on Ukraine, right? Now, I guarantee you, the Russian defense minister told the American Secretary of Defense yesterday and said, we're going to launch nukes if the Ukrainians try to take back Crimea. Now, Crimea, just to show you, Crimea is this peninsula hanging down on Ukraine right here. Oh, thank you for the hat popping up on my Ukraine map. This peninsula here that the Russians stole in 2014. They invaded in 2014 and they stole this Ukrainian territory. It's still part of Ukraine. The whole world recognizes it as Ukraine, but the Russians claim it's now Russia. Well, the Russians have been claiming for a while now that if the Ukrainians try to take back Crimea, that's just like it. No, that is attacking the Russian motherland, because now Russia claims it's Russia. So it's just as if you attacked Moscow. Well, it's not, because it's Ukraine's own territory. But I think that's what the Russians are claiming. And as I was saying, our Secretary of Defense and our government has to keep telling the Russians in response. Oh, I know. I'm sorry. I was telling you what I was actually going to tell you here is why I think it's BS. The Russians aren't going to launch a nuke if the Ukrainians take Crimea. Why would they? Putin's not crazy, right? Putin's vicious, but he's not crazy. I don't think he's crazy. What advantage would Putin see to launching a nuke if the Ukrainians were taking back Crimea, right? If he launches a nuke, it doesn't help him militarily. All the experts have come out and said that actually Putin launching nuclear weapons in Ukraine doesn't actually help him militarily. It's not like all the Ukrainian troops are, standing next to each other, 150,000 of them or whatever, and the Russians can drop a nuke on them and get rid of them, right? The troops are spread all over the country. The headquarters are spread all over the country. So the experts say dropping a nuke doesn't help militarily. The second reason, he could drop a nuke hoping that it scares the Ukrainians so much that Zelensky says, oh, I'm gonna cave, we're gonna concede and let Russia take all the land it wants in Ukraine. I mean, does anybody really think the Ukrainians, especially if Putin were to use a nuclear weapon, are gonna turn around and go, okay, you know what? Now that you nuked us, we, the pushover Ukrainians that we are going to sit back and say, it's okay, take our country, right? The Ukrainians would be, I think, 1,000 times more ticked off than they already are if the Russians dropped a nuke on them. If anything we've learned about the Ukrainians, I mean, I, like all of you, have learned a lot about the Ukrainians these last 8 months. These guys do not back down, and they're not pushovers. So that doesn't make sense why Putin would nuke. And the third reason, Putin knows that if he nukes Ukraine, we are getting into the war. Now, in what way does America enter the war, and in what way does NATO enter the war? We don't know. We don't know if we would blow up the Russian naval base in Sevastopol down in Crimea. We don't know if American fighter jets would start bombing Ukrainian troops or Russian troops around the country. I personally suspect that we would at least implement a no-fly zone where we would literally take the entire country. And we would, of course, talk to the Ukrainians first, but we would implement a no-fly zone, and we would say, this is in response to the Russians nuking Ukraine. We would say, if a single Russian jet enters Ukrainian space or comes within 50 miles of Ukrainian space, we're blowing it out of the sky. And if a single Russian radar on the ground or surface-to-air missile on the ground is turned on within 100 miles of radar, we're blowing it up. And what that would do is it would give the Ukrainians free rein to do whatever kind of air missions they want, and they would destroy the Russians. Russia cannot beat Ukraine in this war. The last thing Russia is going to do is say, we're having a really hard time beating Ukraine. I think it'd be kind of cool to get the Americans and NATO involved now too. They're just not going to. So I take you back to the beginning of how I sort of started this discussion on the nukes and said, for anybody worrying about Russia going nuclear on Ukraine, you've got to ask yourself, why would Russia do this? What advantage does Putin, not, oh, he really doesn't want Ukraine to take Crimea. It is, what advantage does Putin get by nuking Ukraine and potentially starting a nuclear crisis with the US? He gets no advantage. So I don't think it's going to happen. Ukraine's intelligence chief. So not a lot of news on the front. Oh, we've got our spammer back. That's been a first time we have a spammer on some of the other services that comes in occasionally. He's back today. Just to remind folks, I am John Aravosis. You are listening to the Aravosis Report. I am updating you on the latest Ukraine news of the last normally 24 hours. But since today is Monday, of the last 72 hours, all the news that's happened over the weekend, kind of where it stands. And then when I'm done summarizing, thank you, Frete, for that. When I'm done summarizing, we will then do question and answer. And as always, thank you for your gifts. Thank you for the gifts on TikTok, for the super chat questions on YouTube. Talking about the war. So Kherson, let's talk about Kherson, kind of what's going on with the latest battles, okay? There are two main fronts right now in the war, the really hot fronts that everyone's talking about. One of them is out here in eastern Ukraine, okay? And you'll hear a lot about this, although the big discussion right now is about Kherson, which is a region here in southern Ukraine, and it is also the capital of the region. So the town of Kherson is right here, right north of the river. This is the Dnipro River, okay, cutting through Ukraine. So the town of Kherson is north of the river, and otherwise the rest of the region of Kherson is south of the river. Now, thank you for that, Earl, on TikTok. What has been happening in the last month or two in Kherson, you remember how in the last, let's say 2 months, maybe from 8 weeks ago to 4 or 5 weeks ago, we had the Ukrainians just blitzing through the east, right? And they were just really, embarrassingly good how well the Ukrainians were just knocking through the east and hurting the Russians. Okay, so I got the hiccups as I'm talking to you. Take my jacket off, actually. I'm getting warm. I'm getting excited talking to you guys today. So that was the first thing in the east. In the south, in Kherson, what's been going on in the last couple weeks, maybe 2-3 weeks, the Ukrainians have been having great success pushing the Russians further south. Now, it still was even crazier, the success they had in the east, but it's still very good success pushing the Russians south. And now we're trying to figure out, are the Russians abandoning their positions and fleeing? Okay, that's the big discussion right now. Now, the reason the Russians are not in a good position in Kherson, the region in the south, I was telling you about this river, the Dnipro River, that cuts through Ukraine in general, okay? Well, if you look at Russian positions across Ukraine, almost all the Russian troops in Ukraine, whether it's 150,000, however many it is right now, are east of this river, okay? Mostly, they're up here, south of the river, down in Crimea, and then this river here, they even follow the river here, but they're south of the river. Well, once they get over here, they suddenly cross the river and they inhabit an area. About 15 to 25,000 Russian troops are occupying a region of Ukraine that's just right here. You can see the town of Mykolaiv. It's south of Mykolaiv. This is the area the Ukrainians have been having success in, pushing the Russians down. Well, what they're doing is they're pushing the Russians further south and closer to the river. That's not great, right? Because if you've got a river to your back, eventually you've got to either swim across or take a bridge across or do something, because you'll get stuck with the Ukrainians coming at you. Well, the Ukrainians we got somebody here from Kherson. Wow. Good to see you. Hope your family's doing okay. What the Ukrainians have done in the last 2 months, or 3 actually now, they've been blowing up the bridges crossing that river in the Kherson area. And what they're doing is they've made the bridges pretty much impassable so that maybe pedestrians can walk across, but you can't get military equipment. You can't bring in extra tanks. You can't bring in, like a large number of troops, so that the Russian troops, the 15 to 25,000 on the north side of the river, are relatively isolated and have to make a decision eventually. Will they stand their ground and risk being pushed up against the river when there's no bridge to cut across, or will they evacuate? Well, Putin, generally speaking, doesn't like his troops evacuating. He's been kind of ordering them, even if militarily they think they should, he's been ordering them to stay in place. So the big discussion now is what's going on. We have had news reports that the civil administration of Kherson, the city, now when I say the civil administration, I mean the Russian administration. So these are the collaborators. These are Ukrainians working with the Russian occupiers, that all of them have basically, a lot of them have left and fled south of the river. We had reports, for example, there was a report last week that the Russians vacated the fire station of the town of Kherson. They stole the fire engines and drove them south. Now, I'm not quite sure how they got the fire engines across the bridge because the bridge isn't working, but my suspicion is they used one of the pontoon bridges, but that they stole the fire engine. So clearly there's enough evidence from what we're seeing to suggest that the Russians did evacuate the civil service employees, the government employees, their stooges, right? The concern is, and Ukraine's intelligence chief, this is the next story, thinks that the Russian troops themselves may not be evacuating, that the Russian troops themselves may be actually digging in Kherson, and they're even trying to do a bit of a feint, that they're basically getting rid of the civilians in the city, that they're telling civilian citizens to leave. They're telling the civilian government to leave, but that the Russian troops are staying, and they want the Ukrainians to think the Russian troops are leaving. Let me see. There you go. This was another story. This was an interesting story. I thought of showing you guys the video, but it was a little bit difficult to show you on TikTok and the other services. And I have to admit, I was a little bit worried about TikTok and YouTube getting upset about a video. The video itself, a Russian presenter, a talk show host, Anton Krasovsky, went on the air last week. And I don't know if this was Julia Davis. I think it was Julia. It was Julia, actually. Julia is the one who broke this story. Julia Davis is really neat. Any of you who are on YouTube and also Twitter. Julia is originally born in Ukraine. She's Ukrainian. She is fluent in English. And she has been watching the Russian nightly news every night and watching the news, not the news shows, the talk shows. So imagine like Fox News, Tucker Carlson, these kind of shows, right? And she grabs the best or worst parts and translates them into English and puts English subtitles below. And it's usually like a couple different 5-minute segments she puts up. She's really good. I mean, Julia Davis is her name. You can Google her. She's really, is she on TikTok too? I didn't realize that. Oh, thank you, Daniel. Daniel says she's on TikTok too. Check her out. I mean, Julia Davis. I'm getting cold as I talk to you. But Julia had posted this video of this Russian talk show host, Anton Krasovsky, who started talking about drowning Ukrainian children. Really sick stuff. And it was getting shared everywhere to the point where, and this is what's kind of interesting, okay? He was associated with RT, which is Russia Today, the big Russian propaganda organ. And it got so bad, the publicity, that they suspended him. And it was, I think, Margaret Simonyan, or whatever her name is, who's with RT. I think she's the one, but the woman who sort of runs RT, who put out this statement about how inappropriate it was, what he says and everything else. And she herself has, I don't think I've got it here, she herself has quite the history of horrific comments about the Ukrainians. But it was just sort of interesting that this was a bridge too far for the Russians, drowning children. Now, mind you, they've stolen children, they've kidnapped Ukrainian children, and they bombed Ukrainian children, but drowning them is a bridge too far. So, what do you do? Okay, Joseph, thank you for that. I see that Anthony had a question or a comment. Let me put my glasses on real quick on TikTok at a super chat. Would a long, cold winter more benefit Russia? This is a good question, and I haven't been able to get a straight answer on it. Would a long, cold winter more benefit Russia, giving them time to regroup and dig in, or Ukraine, better equipped for the winter? Well, you sort of kind of figured it out, the sort of two things. Hold on. I was going to put a poll on for you guys, and I don't even know. Let's see here. Oh, it's not showing the poll. Okay. Oops. Is my poll? Oh, here we go. Start. There we go. I didn't have my poll on TikTok. Now it's on. This is a question that folks have been asking, and honestly, you sort of spelled it out pretty well, Anthony. I will tell you this. The Russians are not as equipped for dealing with the winter as the Ukrainians, which is a little crazy because Russia, right? I mean, Russia's cold. Siberia, I mean, it's cold. It's their north. I've been in Moscow and St. Petersburg. It was Leningrad back then in February. It was awful. And the funniest part, I mean, horrifically cold. It reminded me, I'm from Chicago. It reminded me of Chicago. Horrifically cold. The best part was they were eating ice cream on the street. They had ice cream, was it Molodezhnoi? I think it's called, the word for ice cream. I still remember there were these ice cream guys selling ice cream on the street, and they didn't care that it was way below freezing. The Russians eat their ice cream. So you'd think they were good about this, right? It was, they don't have the right clothes for the winter. The Ukrainians do. The Ukrainians have places they can go. They can go into people's homes. They can go into schools. They can go to other places to warm up for the evening, right? The Ukrainians can get food at night or during the day from the local women. Again, men can do it too, but probably the local women in Ukraine, right? The Russians aren't getting a lot of food from the locals in Kherson, The only thing is I will say is I've also been hearing, I know the Americans came out in the last week, the American government, and said that, I think it was American intelligence actually, that we are estimating that Ukraine has a good 6 weeks to make advances before winter kicks in fully. That basically this is a 6 weeks of advances that they can do in the east and then advances they can do in Kherson, including possibly getting the capital city of Kherson taken in the next few weeks. But the thought was 6 weeks and then the muddy season comes and forget it, that it's pretty much is going to lock things in place. I will make one final observation on this, Anthony. These are the Ukrainians, so who knows? You know, they might like it to be out there that, oh, you know, in 6 weeks, we're not going to be able to do anything else because of the winter, and they'll turn around and surprise us and keep taking back more and more towns, right? So it's possible, but that's where we are. Just to reboot and tell people where we are, I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. I'm giving you the daily summary of what's been happening in Ukraine and the war for the last 24 hours. Since today is Monday, I'm actually looking back at the last 72 hours. New poll shows that 86% of Ukrainians believe that their country should continue to fight Russia, even if it doesn't stop attacking Ukrainian cities. So, good sign of support there. Thank you for the gifts on TikTok. I was just going to say, do make sure that you follow me on TikTok and YouTube and everywhere else. Please hit the follow button. And please keep the gifts coming, the super chats and the gifts on TikTok, the hats and everything. They really help a lot. Oh, by the way, I saw somebody mention Patrick Lancaster. He got blocked, which is good. Patrick Lancaster is a propagandist for the Russians. Oh, thank you, Michael. I haven't seen that one before. Michael just got us a Halloween gift on TikTok. I hadn't seen that one. That's very cool. Thank you for that. But yeah, Patrick Lancaster is a pro-Russian propagandist. So ignore him. So a letter just came out that kind of annoyed me. I'm going to talk about this letter and maybe I'll summarize the rest of the news after this, because this one is worth talking about a little bit. The U.S. House Progressive Caucus is a group of basically, I don't know if it's 20 or 30, thank you for that, 20 or 30 of the most liberal members of the U.S. House of Representatives, okay? They call themselves progressive. I get a little annoyed by it because I often consider, thank you for that, was it Jesse, I think? I often, on many issues, consider myself a progressive on many issues. I get a little more conservative on defense stuff, but it really is kind of the socialist wing of the Democratic Party. And I'm not going to weigh in on the socialist thing. American socialism is its own very weird thing that is very unlike European socialism. It's much more extreme. It's always had a history of being more pro-Soviet, more pro-Russia, kind of weird here. Well, it's really more the socialist wing of the party, which is new here in America, new in terms of having political power. It's not progressive. And they issued a letter today to Biden calling on him to promote diplomacy because the war is going to go on too long. And it's a little weird. Okay, there's a number. I mean, I'm going to read you a little bit of this. It's really weird. This caucus is the one that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a part of, Ilhan Omar, Tlaib, a number of the most, Cory Bush, the most liberal members of the House. So listen to this, okay? And Jamila, I always get her last name wrong. Jamila, I can't pronounce her last name, with a P. If somebody can get her name correctly, I'm happy to repeat it, but I didn't have it written down here. Listen to this. Crucially, Pramila Jayapal. Thank you, Pramila Jayapal. Thank you, Sean. Listen to this. Crucially, you achieved this. They're talking about the war in Ukraine and Biden's diplomacy. You achieved this while also maintaining that it is imperative to avoid direct military conflict with Russia, which would lead to World War III, something we must strive to prevent. They quote Biden. This is why I've said all along, Biden should have never made the comments about World War III. The risk of nuclear weapons being used has been estimated, okay? Now, mind you, who estimated it, right? They're using the passive voice, but whatever. The risk of nuclear weapons being used has been estimated to be higher now than at any time since the height of the Cold War. Okay, I mean, sure, the Cold War ended in 1989, right? Since 1989, yeah, we're probably most at risk of nuclear weapons. Thank you, Lucky. But that's because there's been no risk of a nuclear war since 1989. There's been zero, right? So the idea that, sure, what's going on in Ukraine has put us most at risk of a nuclear war since 1989? Well, because there's been no risk at all. Sorry, my voice goes up when I get pissed off. Thank you for that, Lex. So, I mean, that's a little disingenuous, but again, meant to scare you. And by the way, what Russian leader do they sound like with these nuclear talking points? So listen to this. Given the catastrophic possibilities of nuclear escalation, who's talking about nuclear escalation, right? Given the catastrophic possibilities of nuclear escalation and miscalculation, thank you for the gift there, which only increase the longer this war continues, we agree with your goal of avoiding direct military conflict as an overriding national security priority. It's like, okay, right? So they're using Putin's nuclear talking point, and then listen to this next paragraph. Given the destruction, okay, listen to this. Listen to this sentence carefully, okay? Listen to this. Given the destruction created by this war for Ukraine and the world, okay, actually, the only destruction created by this war is for Ukraine, not the world, right? Not at all. There's our poll. More than a year. Wow, 73% of you think the war is going to take at least a year or longer. Interesting. Okay, that is interesting, actually. I would agree with you, and I'm fine with that. I would hope it's shorter. Given the destruction created by this war for Ukraine and the world, as well as the risk of catastrophic escalation, we also believe it is in the interests of Ukraine, the United States, and the world to avoid a prolonged conflict. Who the hell are they to tell Ukraine how long the conflict should go for? I mean, it's fine for them to say, you know, as Americans, we don't want the war to go on too long. I don't think you should be saying that publicly, but that's fine. But I mean, given the destruction this causes Ukraine, we believe it is in the interest of Ukraine, the U.S. and the world, to avoid a prolonged conflict. So they're speaking on behalf of Ukraine and saying it's actually in the interest of Ukraine not to have a long war, and that therefore we should be focusing on diplomacy. That is BS. That is utter BS. What really bugs me too, and I'm not going to read the rest of the letter. You've got to read the rest of the letter. And one of the things you'll see them say too, there's a whole paragraph on diplomacy. And I kid you not, it sounds like a child wrote it. I mean, okay, not a child, a college student with no background in foreign policy. It's literally like, you know, Mr. President, you need to talk to the different parties. You need to see, is there something that Putin wants that we could give him that would make him want to stop and give Ukraine's land back? I mean, literally, they're suggesting things where you're going, yeah, that is how diplomacy works. And I'm going to bet that Joe Biden understands that, right? Like he understands the concept of, could we actually give something that Ukraine wants and something Russia wants and figure out how to end this, but Ukraine still gets its land back? What a great idea. By the way, they finally go on and they kind of let the real thing slip through, which is the reason they're promoting all of this is because they think oil prices are going to go down. That's the actual reason, which I find funny for a progressive caucus, because that sounds like the kind of thing you'd think would be more like in the right wing or something like that. Listen to this. The conflict has also contributed to elevated gas and food prices at home, fueling inflation and high oil prices for Americans in recent months. And then they go on to say, economists believe that if we could end the war, prices would go down. And I'm kind of like, okay, did the poll restart? That's okay. If it restarted, well, here we go. Our cool whale again. Woo! Sorry, we got the cool. Wanda got us the very cool whale. Me, but I say us because everyone gets to share in it. The very cool whale on TikTok. It's a neat gift of this, literally this huge whale flying through a black hole or something. It's totally cool. Oh, world end. Oh, you know what, Sam? It's too hard to fix the poll right now. Sam says the world's ending in a year. That's not very good. Let me see. That's funny. Sorry. Didn't mean to. When will the war? No, it says, when will the war end? It says, when will the war end? Yeah, that's what it says. All right. Anyway, that was very funny. The one I'm looking at says, oh, the last poll. Oh, that's crazy. It shouldn't say that. Sorry. When will the world end? In a year? Oh, I see. Sorry for the Marietta head. The world will end in more than a year, you're saying. I see. Oh, God. That's funny. Oops, sorry. Sometimes things get wrong. I apologize for that. Well, I'm glad to think that everybody thinks the world won't end in the next year. That's actually kind of an interesting poll question. I didn't mean to say when will the world end, but the fact that you all think it's going to be later than a year is pretty funny. I mean, and I agree with you. That's good. In any case, it just kind of ticks me off. Let me make one final point too. I've been in politics for over 30 years and at the national level in Washington, D.C. And what really bothers me is this letter that this House Progressive Caucus did to Biden is kind of an in-your-face thing to do, because they're telling him, you don't know what you're doing. And I'm sorry, but the arrogance of it, you really ought to be considering diplomacy. Like the guy isn't considering diplomacy. You know what I mean? And they're doing it 2 weeks before a critical election when, frankly, you know what? You rally around your party 2 weeks before the election. Our congressional elections in America are in 2 weeks. If you're a Republican, you rally around the Republicans. If you're a Democrat, you rally around the Democrats. You don't go and publicly disagree with your leader in a public letter. You just don't do it, right? It's obnoxious. The final point is, and we were discussing this last week, there is real concern as to whether, when the Republicans come in, whether they are going to cut aid to Ukraine. And this was suggested by the incoming man who will probably be the Speaker of the House, but who knows if they win, Kevin McCarthy, who is currently the Republican leader in the U.S. House. He suggested that, that they were going to look much more harshly or whatever at giving aid to Ukraine. The last thing we need is the Democrats on the far left going public and saying, yeah, we're going to kind of look at it too. We're not as sure we want to give money to Ukraine either. You're emboldening the worst elements of the GOP. Anyway, ticks me off. All right, I'm going to summarize some headlines and we can do it. I don't want to go too long with this has already gone on too long. I'm going to do the Q&A. Let me see. Honestly, the only thing I will tell you additional is the new Italian foreign minister gave a really good statement saying that he was going to continue to support Ukraine because there was concern. The new Italian prime minister, little bit fascisty, the woman, and their party, and the new foreign minister, who's Secretary of State, we would say in America, put out a statement on Twitter that was really good and said that actually not only we will continue to support Ukraine, but also said that his very first phone call was to his counterpart, the Ukrainian foreign minister Kuleba. I think it's Dmytro Kuleba. So that was nice to see. I thought that was very good to see. All right, guys, let's keep going. I'm John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. We are talking Ukraine. The news was long today because we had a couple subjects that were annoying me, but let's do more. Well, we did do some questions and answers. Let's do more. I see my buddy Danielle has weighed in. For those of you on TikTok, feel free to ASMR. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that one before. That was funny. That was funny, Bonnie. I'd not seen that before. On TikTok, feel free to go to the Q&A section and put your links there, put your questions there. And if you are a subscriber on TikTok, feel free to enter your question and I can press the subscriber button and I can look and see what the next sort of things are there. I can sort of see your questions stand out. Daniel O'Neill, I know one way to make the Russians think hard about using nukes. Arm the Ukrainians with a few nuclear weapons that can hit Moscow and then announce it under the Budapest Memorandum. Probably a bad idea. Probably a bad idea. I will say this, unfortunately. If the Ukrainians had not given up their nuclear weapons, which they did in the early 1990s, in exchange for a promise from the Brits and the Americans to protect them, Russia probably wouldn't have the nerve to do this, and it's a bad message to be sending to the rest of the world that if you have nuclear weapons, the big boys won't push you around. And if you give up your nuclear weapons, doesn't matter what promises you get, the big boys will push you. The nuclear powers will push you around. That only helps nuclear proliferation. So yeah, I wouldn't go giving them nukes now, Daniel, because part of the problem there is if the Russians find out, then they are going to nuke Ukraine if they see that that Ukraine's getting nuclear weapons. But it is sad that, sort of the way things worked out. All right, guys, I'm going to press the subscriber button on TikTok. Here we go. Lucky Jenna Bean. When do you think they'll make a move at reclaiming Crimea? So Crimea, as I was saying, is this peninsula in southern Ukraine, okay, it was up. I'm going to get rid of Daniel's question. Thanks for that, Daniel. Southern Ukraine, it was stolen by the Russians in 2014 when they invaded. Now, the area that the Russians have invaded this war and the area that the Russians claim to have annexed and made part of Russia, they didn't, but I mean, they think they have, is pretty much everything like south of my finger, okay? So all of this and kind of this is all the area the Russians are claiming now. Crimea is down here. The thinking is that the Ukrainians first need to get back Kherson, which is here, okay? And then I'll come from the top. Once they get this back, then they're on the border with Crimea, and then they can start going further south. Now, the question becomes, let's pretend the Ukrainians are able to push all the way down here. Do they do Crimea next, or do they go east first? It really would depend on which they think they can get more easily, is my suspicion, right? But I think Crimea might be left for last. I don't know, though. I don't know. I think it might be left for last. Thank you, guys. I can see that. Thank you, Mustard. I see people doing the subscriptions. Thank you for that. Why do you think Macron has switched to only Ukraine can decide how this goes? Yeah, so Carol is asking about President Macron in France actually gave a speech this weekend in Italy that a lot of people criticized him for because some snippets of it got shared. Okay, he gave the speech in French. Some snippets got shared in English, and the portions in English sounded like Macron was pandering to the Russians. I am not convinced that that's what was happening. I mean, I don't want to brag, but I studied in France. My French is very good. Audrey can tell you my French is pretty good. And I went and listened to Macron. It was like a 3-minute segment or 5 minutes or something. And I listened to it in French. And what he actually did was exactly what Carol is saying. He was saying how, we've got to figure out how to integrate Russia back into the world order and all of this, which for the long term, not a stupid idea. I mean, the whole idea of integrating other countries into some larger, this is the whole point of the United Nations. The idea was if we could sort of get everybody together, maybe it would stop future wars. This is also the idea behind the European Union. I mean, I don't want to speak for the Europeans here, but I believe this was de Gaulle, and I forget who else. Was it like Adenauer in Germany? Who was it? But it was de Gaulle and others who said, if we can tie together Germany and France, and again, this is a little out of my area, but I know of it. If we can tie together Germany and France economically, maybe they'll stop having wars, since they have been at the center of so many wars in Europe over the years. I know my uncle in Greece, who's gone now, so I feel like I can share some more stories of him, but he was the Greek defense minister, foreign minister, deputy prime minister, and United Nations ambassador under Papandreou, the first Papandreou, the father, back in the 1980s in PASOK. And I had visited him about 10 years ago, maybe or so, and I'd asked him about Turkey. And I said, about Turkey and the European Union, because Turkey's European Union membership has been kind of on hold because of the whole Cyprus situation. And I asked him about whether he thought, Turkey should be in the EU. And I'm thinking, as a Greek, he's going to be like, no, forget it. Leave them on the outside, leave Greece. Greece will get stronger. And he said the opposite. He said, Turkey has to be in the EU. He said, we have to. We've got to get them in here. It's the only way to avoid war in the future is getting them tied in with everybody else. And I just thought that was really fascinating. But that's the similar point here, which is, so Macron was saying after the war, we've got to figure out a long-term strategy for reintegrating Russia. And I thought, it's not bad. Some people took it as being, oh my God, what is he saying? He's worrying now when Russia's committing genocide. He's worrying about trying to help Russia later on. The rest of his speech was saying just that we are going to stand by Ukraine. Ukraine is going to decide when this war ends. It was a good speech, at least from what I heard. So yeah. So he got criticized for it, but Dragana, you are back, my love. However you say that in Serbian. Treat for Sasha. Thank you. French irregular verbs. Ah oui. The only thing is you learn them by being there. I mean, I was studying in France for a year. That's how you learn your foreign languages. You go over there. Yeah, Elise says Macron's French is so good, I can understand him. It is. You know whose French is really good too? Francois Mitterrand, who was the French president back in the 1980s. Excellent French. But I mean, meaning, of course, all the French people speak French, but a wonderful, slow, rich, easy to understand. Thank you, Michael. Well, easy to understand in principle. I mean, the man was very smart. So, there's that. All right, we've got that. Let me go to the TikTok queue. Oh, hello, big drama. That's kind of cool. I haven't seen the Golden Gate Bridge thing before. Oh, that's very cool. I don't know if that's a new one or not. I've never seen that before. Thank you for that. Hello. I'm trying to get on my TikTok, and of course it's throwing up that ad. And by the way, just to remind folks, I am John Aravosis. You're watching the Aravosis Report. This is my daily update on what's going on in Ukraine. We are now in the portion of the show where you guys ask questions, I answer, we discuss. Some of you also have expertise in this. You join in, but we're pretty much having a discussion right now on TikTok. Either as a subscriber to my TikTok, I should say as a paid subscriber, you can put a question and I will hopefully be able to get to it. I can't get to everything. And on TikTok, it's the super chat questions, but also to be nice to the rest of you on TikTok, I am going to pull up my Q&A in my profile and just see what you guys are asking here too. What happens if a NATO country goes to war with another NATO country? I was wondering about, somebody asked, we were wondering about this the other day. Not that I think it will happen, but what if? It would, I mean, I'm a lawyer too, so it depends on what the language is, but my suspicion is if the whole NATO, Article 5 of the NATO Charter says that an attack on one member is an attack on all members. And in principle, the other members will come to your defense, although it's not a guarantee. Each member gets to decide if they're going to come to your defense and to what degree, right? So not a guarantee, but the NATO Charter is not invoked because you attack someone. The NATO Charter is invoked when you are attacked. So if the US, I am getting just hot and cold here. I'm getting like my hot flashes tonight. It's just the weather's in between in DC. So I'm in between winter and summer here. If the US decides to attack Nicaragua, we go to war with Mexico. If the US attacks Mexico, the NATO Charter is not invoked. Article 5. If Mexico attacks the United States, Article 5 could be invoked. So a NATO member has to be attacked. So I would think if Hungary attacks Poland, Poland would, depending on the language, Poland would have the right to say, I was attacked. Other NATO countries come to my defense, and the other NATO countries have to. Even if it's a fellow NATO country, the only thing would be if the charter says that it only applies to countries outside of NATO attacking you. And I don't know whether that's the case, but I would probably say doesn't really matter, because if you want to really stop, for example, France and Germany, we've talked about, if you want France and Germany to stop having historic wars, put them both in NATO and say, if either of you attack the other, guess what happens? All the other NATO countries are going to get together and fight you. We're all going to help the person that got attacked. That's a great way to, again, provide a disincentive to going to war. That's my guess. So, let me look here. Actually, I think I saved a few of... Oh, Matt Parker is saying the science behind dirty bombs is pretty flimsy. I think if you read up on them, you'll find that there's little to no evidence that a dirty bomb would work at all. Well, Matt, I mean, the issue with a dirty bomb, we were talking about this at the beginning of the show, because the Russians are making the claim that the Ukrainians are preparing to set off a dirty bomb and they're going to, blow up the world and this kind of crazy stuff. A dirty bomb is basically a regular bomb that you tie some nuclear material to. And it would be like literally getting some, fuel rods from a nuclear plant or something and literally duct tape them onto a bomb, a regular bomb. And when the bomb goes off, it doesn't make a nuclear explosion, but the theory is when the bomb explodes, it also explodes the nuclear material, and the nuclear material would vaporize and get thrown everywhere along with the bomb material, and you then would spread the radiation and you'd spread terror. Because imagine, I think downtown Washington, D.C., the idea of a dirty bomb, a bomb that had plutonium in it going off downtown, people would panic. just because the whole nature of plutonium, you'd think nuclear bomb, even though it might mean a couple blocks of DC would be radiated, which would be very bad, but it wouldn't be the same thing as a nuclear bomb. Now, Matt, so it depends what you mean by that, as far as whether you mean it also isn't clear whether it would even kind of vaporize the nuclear material. In other words, would it just throw a chunk of plutonium over there, or it wouldn't even, that it wouldn't even vaporize it and send it around? I'm not sure what Matt was saying. Sorry, I didn't get to your question earlier. This is cute. People are debating the verb structure of the various languages now. Alec is asking about Saudi Arabia. Oh God, Alec, that's a whole other area. I heard the tensions between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia were at a high. What's your thoughts? I mean, yeah, they are. I don't want to get too much into Saudi Arabia tonight because we're talking Ukraine. I will say this. I am sympathetic to having I don't want to put this. Countries have to act in their own self-interest, okay? And the U.S. has to be concerned about saddling up to dictators, but we also have to understand that, we have to survive in the world as well. Saudi Arabia is a dictatorship. Saudi Arabia also controls a hell of a lot of oil, and they're very important to us. And I don't mean they're very important to us as in we care about them. I mean, they can screw over the U.S. economy. And frankly, they are doing it right now. And they're probably doing it because they're trying to hurt Biden in the election, is my guess. So we really don't have a choice. Israel. I'm not going to get into the whole Israel fight with you guys, but Israel is important strategically and militarily to the United States. That matters. Human rights and civil rights also matter. And frankly, I worry about the human and civil rights of Israelis and Palestinians, both. But my point here is that you can't, I'm not a big believer in just saying Saudi Arabia is evil, therefore we cut them off 100% and hope their government gets overthrown. Because what comes next? Do we get another Iran, right? Do we get a whole group of mullahs come? Is it Afghanistan, the Taliban all over again? And we now have a Taliban that controls, most of the world's oil reserves? I mean, that's pretty freaky, right? So that is my quick answer on Saudi Arabia is I will say this. I do think it maybe is time that we get a little tougher with Saudi Arabia because they're being tough with us. And, they are a really awful dictatorship. And if they're not going to try to help the world with oil prices and things like that, then what's the point of supporting a dictatorship? So, but it's a very coy dance, I think. I do think that. People are still talking. I love this. People are still talking foreign language and French over on on YouTube. This is funny. Let me see. Just seeing if you guys had more questions. Okay, I'm not seeing more questions from the subscription folks. That's fine. You don't have to have them. All right, I will pull another question off the TikTok Q&A function here. TikTok Q&A. Hair up there. Wow. I'm not sure what to tell you. Somebody's going to Bakhmut on the 31st for humanitarian work. What can you tell me? I might not already know. I don't know. So Bakhmut is an important town in the east of Ukraine that there's been a lot of fighting going on recently between the Ukrainians and the Russians. The Russians have been kind of bragging, their bragging rights, and the Ukrainians look like they're kind of closing in on it. But I mean, you need to talk to the humanitarian aid folks out there. We've got one guy, John Hoover, who's often with us on TikTok, watching, John and others. Any journalist friends? I mean, I was considering going to Ukraine actually at the end of November, and now it's being put off. But I was doing some humanitarian work going and just reporting from there, which would have been just amazing, but also kind of scary. And I reached out to humanitarian groups and I reached out to journalists I knew to get their opinion, So, but there you go. There you go. We'll do. Let me see what else we got here. John, don't you think we are way past bringing Russia back into the fold after this is over, considering what they've done? I mean, to a degree, yes. I guess the thing is, look, Russia kind of has to decide what it wants to be when it grows up. Thank you, George. Appreciate your Appreciate you're appreciating it. We got another couple minutes, guys. I'm going to go a little bit over because I had a lot of news today, so we didn't have enough. Fina is saying hello from Ukraine. Hello, Fina. Actually, folks, we forgot our tradition of doing sunflowers whenever we have. There we go. Allie's doing it. Whenever we have the Ukrainians pop up on our TikTok or our YouTube, we throw sunflowers at them, which is the national flower of Ukraine. So please do. Sorry. See, I always, whenever I get a tangent, I forget. Oh yeah. So, Russia is not Europe. I mean, people argue that maybe Moscow to the west is a European country and the rest of Russia is like an Asian country or whatever. I've been to Russia. Nice people. Government, scary. I was there during the Soviet Union years. Really freaking scary during that. That's its own topic of discussion someday. But I'm just not sure that, I don't know. I feel like Russia needs its own revolution before we can somehow help Russia. Russia has to want to help itself. This is a theory I've long had of international relations, is that you can't impose a revolution on a country, right? You can take out Saddam Hussein. You can knock the Taliban out in Afghanistan, but that doesn't mean the Afghanis or the Iraqis are able to take over for themselves. They kind of have to look what we've seen with the Iraqi army and the Afghan army. You kind of have to want to defend your own country, right? In Ukraine, they want to defend their own country. Iraq, Afghanistan, even worse. It really depends on the country. And it's Russia, we can't impose democracy on them. I don't think we can impose liberalism on them. And by liberalism, I don't mean left versus right, but I mean having a more open, now mind you, we're having a problem with liberalism in the West right now, but having a more open mindset towards education and culture and civil rights and human rights, right? We can't impose that on them. They've got to kind of want to do it. And I think it's very sad. Like I said, when I've gone to Russia twice now, I was there during the Soviet Union. I went to Moscow and Leningrad. And then I went back in like 1993 with my friend Marion, who joins us a lot on TikTok. And we went to Petropavlovsk in Kamchatka. That was fascinating. Kamchatka, like from Risk, absolutely fascinating. And again, I met the nicest people, which is also kind of fascinating because there's this, as me and Ukraine is saying, it's a mentality thing. There is a weird mentality thing going on with Russia as well. But you will meet some of the nicest people. But maybe that's true of every country, right? So maybe that's not a good gauge either, right? There's always nice people that you'll meet in the countryside. And I've met a lot of really nice Russian, lovely people. Very, very warm or big-hearted, warm-hearted people. Soulful, maybe is a good way of putting it. But man, if they don't like their bad governments, how many hundreds of years do they have bad governments over there? So so I don't know. I don't know that we can, how do you integrate Russia back into the world order, right? We had the Soviet Union integrated into the world order. It didn't help. We tried with Russia for the last 30 years. It didn't help. I think the Russians need to decide. The Russians have got to watch, it's bad enough that America and Europe, not America, North America and Europe and much of Asia passed them by. Now they're going to watch the Chinese passing them by too, because China's here to stay. China's economic growth is definitely slowed down significantly, which could be a problem. But does anybody think in the next 50 years, the trajectory of China versus Russia? China's going like this. Russia's going, because they don't want to open up their country. It's almost like a cultural autarky. Autarky, I remember from my economics classes, is this idea that we're going to do everything economically ourselves. We're going to build our own cars. We're going to build our own this. We're going to, that everything, you won't sort of international trade at all. Everything is going to be built at home. Well, that sounds nice, but in international trade, that in principle, you've got more efficiencies. If you make it cheaper, I buy from you, blah, blah, blah. At least that's the theory. I think Russia thinks that way culturally. Everything has to be Russian and the rest of you are dirty. And that's what they've been saying lately. They've been attacking Western culture, and it's like, I think Russia would do a lot better if Russia would just kind of join the rest of the world. But anyway, maybe that's my Western bias. I don't know, but it worries me. It really, but again, I don't think they wanted. I mean, that's where I was so excited when the Cold War ended, because I was around. I was in graduate school in the 1980s, and I focused a lot of my graduate studies in international relations at Georgetown. I focused on the Soviets. I did Soviet law. I did Soviet foreign policy. I took a lot of Middle East crisis classes, Middle East conflict, but a lot of that, it was certainly learning a lot about the Israelis versus the Palestinians versus the Arabs, but it was also Soviet versus America was a lot of it. Latin America, a lot of Soviet versus America. I mean, it was, anyway, whatever. Oh, the Soviets did have law. It was Marion's the expert on that, actually. My friend Marion, I've got to get Marion one of the times here. All right, guys, let me do a quick summary of the news again. I'll do sort of my recap of the top stories. I'll mention a few of the other stories that I didn't mention because we went on so long today, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so let me if you're coming new, I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. Every day, Monday to Friday. Thank you for the hat, Michael. I'm doing a summary of the latest news from Ukraine, from the war, and then we do a question and answer. We just finished that part, and I'll take a couple minutes and just read you the top headlines of the news of the last 72 hours that I think matter, and then we'll call it quits. So Russia is now claiming that Ukraine wants to blow up 2 dams, wants to launch a dirty nuclear bomb, and is planning on blowing up its own nuclear plant. No one serious believes this. The Russian defense minister called the US, the UK, the French, and the Turkish defense ministers to claim that Ukraine was getting ready to blow up a dirty bomb. The French, the Americans, and the Brits turned around and issued a joint statement accusing Russia of lying and using the lie as a pretext to escalate. Shoigu, the defense minister of Russia, then called the American Secretary of Defense a second time, and this time allegedly, or not allegedly, but I think it's true, was laying out for the Americans under what conditions Russia would use a nuclear bomb in Ukraine. And we don't know what he said, but I'm certainly hoping that the American Secretary of Defense listened and went, yeah, no, you're not. No, you're not. You do that, and it's going to be catastrophic for you, and I'm just telling you right now. And my suspicion is that's exactly what our Secretary of Defense told him. Ukraine's intelligence chief thinks that Russian troops are only creating an illusion that they are leaving the northern area of the Kherson province in southern Ukraine, that they are going to continue fighting. The New York Times is reporting on a Russian talk show host, Anton Krasovsky, who apologized on Monday after he was suspended by a Russian state broadcaster for suggesting that Ukrainian children should be drowned or burned in their homes. Lovely man. A new poll of Ukrainians shows 86% of Ukrainians believe that their country should continue to fight Russia, in spite of the attacks on their infrastructure. The U.S. House Progressive Caucus called on President Biden to focus more on diplomacy, suggesting that the risk of nuclear war is growing and implying that Biden doesn't care about diplomacy, which I thought was, this is the implication. They didn't say it outright, but that was the implication. I thought it was a cheap shot at Biden 2 weeks before an important election. This was some of the other stories I didn't mention. Ukrainian intelligence, here's the rest of the, when will the war end? Here we go. So this was the correct poll question. This is perfect timing. When will the war end? More than a year, 48%. Within a year, 34%. Within 6 months, 17%. Oh, that's interesting. So pretty much, so 17% think it's within 6 months. 34% think within a year. 48% longer than a year. I'm kind of on the more than a year side, just because I can't really figure out how Russia finally decides to leave. Hey, Cal, thank you. Hello from Scotland. So Ukrainian intelligence is saying that Russian conscripts are being equipped with Iranian-made helmets and body armor, and that it is evidence of just how the Russians do not have enough equipment for their new conscripts, that they're having to go to the Iranians, and former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, says that Russian war reparations to Ukraine should be in the range of $750 billion with a B to $1 trillion that Russia should have to pay Ukraine when the war is over. That's going to be another issue that's going to be very difficult to resolve, is what do we do about the sanctions on Russia? And what do we do about all the money that Russia owes Ukraine for this war? And frankly, what do we do about the war crimes? Although I don't know with the war crimes whether you can do anything at all. I think they get investigated on their own independently. Andrew Mason is saying, you can't just try to destroy Russia after the war. It sucks, but look at Germany post-World War I. Punishing a country after a war does more harm than good. Possibly. Yeah, possibly. You know? But I also feel like we have to beat Russia in this war, though, and the Ukrainians do, and we've got to help them. But if you can't, but again, if Russia's not going to come around afterwards, then what do you do? You know, in the Soviet Union, we cornered the Soviet Union. You know, I don't know. Elon Musk says he already had told the Ukrainian government that Starlink, his internet service, would stay up after when we had that big kerfuffle last week. He said that he had already told them privately he wasn't going to yank the plug, which is good. Good for Elon. And finally, Italy's new foreign minister, Antonio Tajani, said this weekend that his first phone call was to his Ukrainian counterpart, Dmytro Kuleba. I reaffirmed Italy's full support for Ukraine in defense of freedom and against the Russian invasion. There will be no peace. Thank you, Kim. There will be no peace without justice, and justice means Ukraine's independence. So that was actually pretty good, considering we're worried about Iran. We're worried about Italy's government. All right, guys, I am going to wrap it up. We can go to the Discord for a little bit afterwards. I've got a Discord as well. I am John Aravosis. You've been listening to the Aravosis Report. I will be back tomorrow. Thank you, Bonnie, for that. I will be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. That's 6 p.m. New York City time. So set your calendars. And thank you for the final gifts on TikTok. And I'll update you on the news from tonight until tomorrow, and we'll do the same thing. We'll have a discussion. Feel free to drop by for a few minutes or longer if you want. I've got a Discord as well you can check out. It's discord.aravosis.com. It's a news Discord, basically. I'll go there and we'll hang out a little bit right now. I will finally say, if you want to just find out, you can find out more about me with my LinkedIn. You can go to my storefront where I sell a lot of like Ukrainian themed shirts and things. Go to Aravosis.com, my last name.com, and it brings up my Patreon, how you can help me out, my Discord, my LinkedIn. You can read my background, why I'm doing this stuff. Anyway, lots of different stuff. I can't even think of everything, but you can check it out there. We can talk about Elon again tomorrow. I did talk about Elon a lot in the last week, but things have kind of calmed down on the Elon front. But I'm happy to talk about it next week. Or not next week, excuse me, tomorrow, if the question comes up. All right, guys, thank you for joining me. Thank you, TikTokers. You've been amazing as always. I appreciate the gifts and I appreciate the follows. Please do follow me on TikTok before you go. And the rest of you, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, Twitter, Facebook. I think that's it. You guys are awesome as well. And thank you finally for the moderators. I understand from just reading the comments, things got a little wild tonight. Don't they always? Thank you for that. And let's go over to Discord, discord.aravosis.com, and we'll hang a little bit, okay? Not too long. I think I was getting too excited today. I can tell when my voice gets more tight because I was getting too into it. All right, hanging up on you guys, and then TikTok, you